Daniel stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the city lights smear into long, blurred streaks behind the rain. The penthouse was quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the eardrums, heavy and unyielding. 6 months ago, this view had felt like a throne. Now, it was just a vantage point for a life that had unraveled in real time. He glanced at the digital display on his desk. The balance was $2 million lower than it had been at the start of the year. 10 years of labor, every late night, every strategic gamble had been dismantled by bad partnerships and shifting markets. The city below continued to pulse with movement, unaware that his world had stalled completely. He gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. There was no noise from the office, no hum of servers, no chatter of employees. Every asset had been liquidated, every contract terminated. The magnitude of the loss was not just in the numbers. It was in the hollow space where his purpose used to reside. He was a man holding the blueprints of a building that had already been reduced to ash, standing in the dark, waiting for a signal that would never come. He turned away from the window, the movement slow and deliberate. The apartment was stripped of its former energy. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen dark, and let it fall. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, hollow crack and slid into the shadow of a chair. It had not buzzed or lit up in weeks. He listened for a sound, but the floorboards remained dead. There were no more urgent calls from partners, no requests for his time, no invitations to boardrooms. The network he had spent a decade cultivating had evaporated as soon as the capital dried up. He walked into the kitchen. The marble surfaces were clean, cold, and entirely unused. He opened the refrigerator, found nothing but a bottle of water, and closed it again. The silence in the room was absolute, a physical weight that followed him from corner to corner. He stood in the center of the living area, looking at the empty space where his desk used to be. Every chair was pushed in. Every drawer was locked. The scale of his withdrawal was complete. He was not just broke. He was erased from the map of the people he once led. He drifted toward the bookshelf, his gaze catching on a worn, leather-bound volume he had not touched in years. It was a relic of his early ambition, a book by Napoleon Hill. He pulled it from the shelf, the spine creaking under his grip. He flipped through the pages, his thumb stopping at a dog-eared corner. The words stared back at him with an offensive, clinical detachment. Every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Daniel read the sentence twice. He let out a sharp, jagged laugh that died in the stale air of the room. A seed of benefit? He looked at the bank notices on his counter, at the empty apartment, and at the wreckage of his decade-long career. There was no benefit in the cold, hard reality of his bankruptcy. There was only the crushing weight of failure. The philosophy felt like an insult, a cruel joke played by a man who had never faced a closing door. His hand trembled. He drew back and hurled the book across the room. It struck the far wall with a dull, heavy thud and tumbled to the floor. Its pages splayed open in the dust. He turned his back on it, refusing to acknowledge the possibility of recovery. The book remained on the floor for days, its pages gathering dust in the dim light. Daniel sat in the corner, staring at the spine. The words on that dog-eared page did not vanish. They occupied the empty space of his apartment, echoing against the quiet walls. He finally stood, walked over, and retrieved the volume. He did not read it for comfort. He read it for a target. He cleared the dining table, pushed aside the debris of his daily neglect, and laid out a fresh notebook. He uncapped a pen. The audit began with the first company, the one he had dismantled through his own hand. He wrote down the dates of his worst decisions. He mapped every ignored warning sign from his former partners. He listed every instance where his own pride had blinded him to the shifting market. His hand moved across the paper, filling page after page with a ledger of his own incompetence. There was no ego left to protect. He stripped away the excuses, the blame he had placed on others, and the myths of bad luck. He filled the notebook with hard, cold truths. Every entry was a confession. Every line was a lesson written in the ink of his own failures. The apartment was no longer a tomb. It was a workshop. The heavy silence of the apartment was replaced by the chaotic hum of a local cafe. Daniel pulled a chair into a cramped corner, away from the windows. He had traded his penthouse view for the sight of steam rising from a chipped ceramic mug. The gig was small, the pay was negligible, and the startup founders sitting across from him were young, eager, and impatient. He opened his worn notebook, the pages filled with his own past errors. He did not lead with a lecture. He did not talk about his former success or the scale of the company he once commanded. Instead, he leaned back and listened. He watched the way they navigated their own obstacles, noting the exact moments they drifted toward the same traps he had fallen into years prior. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of the bravado that had once defined his meetings. He asked questions that forced them to stop and reevaluate their trajectory. He was no longer the man who stood at the head of the boardroom table, dictating the future. He was the man in the corner, learning to build from the ground up, one observation at a time. The startup founders stopped ignoring his warnings. They began to realize the man in the corner was not just offering opinions. He was mapping the exact contours of their impending failures. During a strategy session, one founder pushed back against a pivot, calling it too cautious. Daniel did not argue. He simply opened his notebook to the page detailing his own collapse. He pointed to a specific date, a specific decision, and a specific outcome. The room went quiet as he walked them through the math of his own downfall. He became a surgical tool for their business. Where others offered them polished theories on growth, Daniel offered them the raw, jagged edges of his own experience. He showed them the blind spots they were too arrogant to see. His clients started to pay for the lessons he had earned through absolute ruin. The momentum shifted. His reputation as a consultant grew not because he was a genius, but because he was a survivor who knew the weight of every mistake. He found a quiet sense of purpose in these sessions. His own past, once a source of shame, became the most valuable asset in the room. He was healing his own professional identity by preventing the destruction of theirs. The setting changed. The cramped cafe gave way to a glass-walled conference room in the financial district. A row of investors sat across from Daniel, their expressions guarded, waiting for the standard pitch on rapid growth. Daniel did not open a digital presentation. He placed his worn notebook on the table. He stood up, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote a single large number 2 million, the exact amount of his catastrophic loss. The room shifted. A few investors exchanged skeptical glances, but they did not interrupt. Daniel began to speak, his voice devoid of salesmanship. He did not sell a vision. He sold the autopsy of bad judgment. He walked them through the mechanisms of his own bankruptcy with the chilling precision of a man who had lived every second of it. He cataloged his overconfidence, his ignored warnings, and his flawed risk assessments as if he were reading a blueprint. The investors leaned in, their pens hovering over pads. They were no longer looking for a quick return. They were looking for the safety he provided. He was not just a consultant anymore. He was a human alarm system. By the time he finished, the skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a tense, focused silence. He had turned his shame into a commodity that they could not afford to ignore. The investment came, but Daniel dictated the terms. He signed the contracts with a steady hand and immediately began building the firm he wished he had owned a decade prior. He bypassed the flashy offices and the bloated staffing models. He chose a space that functioned like a machine, with every process mapped for maximum risk mitigation. He spent the first week installing systems of absolute clarity, ensuring that no decision was made without a verified audit trail. When his partners pushed for rapid market expansion, he held the line. He drafted a strict protocol for resource allocation that prioritized sustainability over speed. He kept the team small, hand-picking individuals who valued precision over ambition. Every morning, he walked the floor, checking the metrics not for total revenue, but for systemic stability. He was building a fortress, not a playground. He kept his own notebook on the desk, a constant reminder of the chaos he had once invited. He was no longer a gambler chasing luck. He was an architect of controlled outcomes. By the end of the month, the firm was fully operational, running with a cold, rhythmic efficiency. He stood in the center of the office, watching the data streams, knowing that every brick in this new foundation was laid to prevent the ghost of his past from ever returning. The quarterly report arrived on his screen at 4 in the afternoon. Daniel tapped the key to refresh the dashboard. The numbers climbed, stabilized, and finally crossed the threshold. The total revenue figure blinked in green, officially surpassing the highest peak of his failed enterprise. He did not call his team. He did not leave the office to celebrate. He sat back in his chair and looked at the screen. The gap was clear. He had reached the same height, but the terrain beneath him was entirely different. There was no volatility here, no hidden debt, no reliance on market trends he did not understand. He traced the lines of the growth chart with his finger, noting the steadiness of the trajectory. He had achieved in 2 years what had taken him a decade to build previously, and he had done it with half the stress. A heavy, quiet sense of vindication settled in the room. He realized that the architecture of his failure had become the foundation of this success. He had spent years dissecting the reasons for his previous collapse, and every lesson had been distilled into the systems now running this firm. The metrics proved it. The growth was not an accident. It was a result of deliberate, informed design. He closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the silence of the office confirm what the numbers already knew. A young entrepreneur sat across from him, leaning forward with an intent expression. He asked the question that had been hovering in the air for weeks. If you could go back to that moment, the moment the $2 million vanished, would you stop it? Would you change the outcome? Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of drafting strategies and auditing his own errors. He scanned the bustling office, listening to the steady, rhythmic hum of a business built on discipline rather than ego. He saw the empty space where his arrogance used to be, now filled with the weight of hard-earned experience. He shook his head slowly. The loss had been the tuition he paid for a level of wisdom that easy success could never provide. It had been the catalyst for everything he was now. He looked at the younger man and offered a thin, certain smile. "No," he said, his voice steady. "I would not change a single detail. That failure was the absolute foundation of everything I am today. The lesson had finally taken root. The seed of adversity had finished its cycle, yielding a harvest that no amount of early luck could have ever produced." He turned back to his desk, ready to start the next day.